247.
I call Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to concentrate on another issue, but there is one point I'd like to bring up. The Honourable Craig Foss stood up and called out to Chris Hipkins, "Haven't you heard of Skype? Don't you use Skype?" And I'm wondering if this is Mr. Foss's answer to phone calls, local phone calls that aren't going to be free. So is Mr. Foss indicating that everyone should get on Skype and they should Skype their next door neighbour if they want to have a cup of coffee, which is the example that Mr. Hipkins put forward. The other thing I would say, of course, is the people in Warrell, the schools, which aren't going to get the ultra-fast broadband, probably won't have a great Skype because they aren't going to get this ultra-fast broadband. But Mr. Foss, or the Minister, perhaps you could answer on behalf of your newest Minister, is the Minister suggesting that perhaps an answer to this is everyone go on Skype and that's the only way they're going to be able to get free local phone calls? There is one other thing I would like to talk about, and it says here in the SOP to reflect that the Kiwi share obligation will not be operative following structural separation of telecom. And again, I'm not 100% sure what that means. Does that mean it's just going to be turned off when it can be turned on again, or it's going to be done away with completely? I'd love to know these things. It's interesting, I was talking to an old minister, well, not a minister who was around a long time ago, and we were talking about what went on in the House. And I said the frustrating thing with a lot of these committee stage debates is we throw out these questions, and most of them are pretty valued questions, and the minister doesn't get up and answer them. And it's really frustrating. And he shook his head and said, you know, in the old days, if a member threw a question out to the minister in the chair, the minister would get up and answer that question. Now, every now and again when there's a...
Sometimes I didn't even bother getting up, I'd debate
yeah. Well, every now and again, you know, you'll see someone like, because this is my first term, of course, so this is all new to me, Peter Dunn. Will there be a tax bill? And there'll be questions thrown at Peter Dunn about the implications of the words written in the legislation. And Peter Dunn, for all his faults, he actually stands up and he engages and he attempts to answer the questions put forward by ministers. And what that does is often members, as Gareth Hughes mentioned, you know, he's a fellow of the new age, he's coming through Skype and Google and this sort of Facebook. Often what members are doing are only relaying the concerns and the questions of constituents who are just as bamboozled by this as us. So it would be great, not just for us, but for the people of New Zealand who are actually watching this debate and have a vested interest in this, i.e. because they do live in rural areas, if in fact the Minister could stand up and provide an explanation as to what the implications around the fact that the Kiwi share obligation will not be operative following structural separation of telecom. What that actually means. And as mentioned, if it had gone through Select Committee, we would have found that out. We could have come to this House and debated that in the knowledge that New Zealanders had spoken. But this isn't the case. And like I mentioned, Mr Joyce is not stupid. There is no doubt about that. And so I'm wondering why this was put in straight away. And I would like to, and this is where the strange, and I'd like to go to Clause 5, Part B, where it says, the Communications Commissioner must report to the Minister about every proposed alteration to Schedule 1. Now, if we go to Schedule 1, and this is where, I know we're not allowed to use that H word, but this is where sort of there's a sort of a dichotomy, or there's a confusion in terms of the process we're going through at the moment and what's allowed to happen. So what we've got here in Schedule 1, Part 2, it talks about the appointment of consumer complaint system. And this bill is incredibly tightly drafted, and the reason for that is because it came under minute scrutiny. And anyone on the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee will know that it came under intense scrutiny, every word. And so what we're talking about here is appointment of a consumer complaint system. And it says here, the Minister may, by notice in the Gazette. Now, why is it the Minister may? Why isn't the Minister must? But we'll get on to the Minister may appoint a system to be a consumer complaint system under this part, with or without conditions, for a term specified by the Minister. It's all about the Minister here. By the Minister, and set rules for the system and set rules about the funding of the system. Well, I would love to see that saying the Minister must, because, you know, we're talking about New Zealanders here, we're talking about a very important part of local infrastructure. You should, Minister, it would be great to see you change that, say the Minister must. Anyway, the objectives of a consumer complaint system, and we're Schedule 1, Part 2, When considering the appointment of the system, the Minister must have regard, well, he must if he decides the may was going to work. Mr Chairman.
Move that the question be now put.
From the Honourable Trevor Mallard.